Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson. Today we have a show that is part of our Myth Warriors series. And of course this is our series where we don our defensive and offensive gear, and we're out there in the world and we're probing, we're questioning, we're exploring, we're assessing, we're analyzing ideas and concepts to try to determine, is it something that might be credible? If so, what's the probability? And in the alternative, is it something that actually appears to be a myth or a fallacy and an untruth or even a straight out lie? So, as always, I encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com to share any questions, feedback, show ideas, or any other feedback. This specific show is addressing the concept to try to determine if it is potentially a myth of I am an INTJ, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Or am I? So the idea here is that the assertion, the concept is, I am an INTJ, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Or am I? So what we're trying to do is ask sort of the general broad question, is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator tool credible, not credible, or potentially or probably one more than the other? And so I actually, in full disclosure, selected my own Myers-Briggs Type Indicator outcome, which is INTJ. And so the idea here is we're trying to figure out, okay, is this an accurate assertion? If someone says, hey, this is my Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI for short, outcome. I am this thing. That's what this tool tells me I am. Is that a myth, or is that something that we could potentially find to be accurate? And I personally am really intrigued by this. Certainly many other programs that we provide, and our entire framework, of course, is focused on helping to surpass our individual and collective organizational goals in our entire holistic approach to life. So not just at work, but also in our personal lives, in our social time, in our health, in our emotional well-being. So the quest to try to find out, well, okay, what are our goals, right? Sort of, that sort of root question, who am I? What do I want? What makes me tick? What makes me feel better? What makes me feel worse? All of this is something that, depending on our lives and how much time and resources and validity we attribute to this entire endeavor of sort of unearthing or discovering or defining this idea of self, we're going to invest, what we feel is an appropriate amount of time. But it's something that many people do spend some time thinking about, right? Who am I? Why do I do the things I do? And we may think about it just in a really sort of tangible, basic application to our lives. If somebody has a habit of being really early for things, so early that it sometimes creates anxiety for other people, they may start to ask themselves, well, why am I doing that? If somebody has a habit of being, late, they may ask themselves, why am I doing that? Somebody else may go to a different level and ask themselves, well, why do I not feel happier, even though I have received a good opportunity in my professional life? Or someone might say, why am I not more distraught and sad when all these horrible things may have recently happened in my life? So this idea of sort of who are we at some level, whether it's just sort of surface or whether it's sort of an in-depth analysis, is something that we do explore in our lives. And as part of that, there is an entire, I was going to say industry, but I think it's certainly there's an entire school of thought that has evolved in modern times, certainly into a lot of the more recent psychology, industrial organizational psychology, things of that nature, where we have people who specialize in just studying this and trying to develop ways, methods, tools, techniques to try to discern and uncover who are we. And the idea, though, is when we're looking at organizational development and the application of these sort of personal questions, ideally we want to apply them to the entire organization. So not just sort of one person, not just sort of, Susie or Javier or Courtney sitting somewhere thinking, who am I? What makes me tick? What are some of my personality traits? But an organization, so an employer, a university, a school trying to help their students better define and hone in on potential career opportunities, so that there's this area where people study and come up with and create potential tools to help us determine who we are. And those are something that individually might be interesting to us, but often the professionals who spend the time sort of creating these tools, their first line of dissemination of their ideas and their techniques and their tools and their framework, often their organizations, because one person in spending the time and trying to find out who they are is interesting, yet it's difficult to build a business model around that or even to affect larger change. It's much more effective to go to large organizations and say, hey, you have 50,000 team members. Why don't you take this tool and use it, so that each individual team member will also gain some insight, but then you as an organization can be able to use this information and data to better structure your team, to better understand the type of person that succeeds in different types of jobs, all of that. So there's the higher level just quest for knowledge, right? Who am I? When typically we're asking ourselves that, we're not asking ourselves that from a professional perspective. We're not thinking, I wonder who I am and my personality traits, and how will I be able to monetize that or market it? That's typically not it, right? It's personal. Like, I want to better understand, why do I, habitually have anxiety about this issue, or why do I approach problems that way, or why do I tend to react this way at a party? I mean, it's a personal thing. So you can see why there's this sort of just quest that we have as individuals, and in sort of the more abstract and just pure love of information, where we sort of want to find out. And then we also have, of course, the idea of commerce, and people who put a lot of work into these things at some point may need, right, to be able to secure funding, to be able to continue to research, to be able to continue to have the creative time to think and sit and walk and explore their own ideas to create potential tools and quizzes. So these two areas, sort of my own sort of heightened curiosity and intellectual quest for information, coupled with the marketplace, aren't necessarily opposed. They often can be very complementary. But yeah, what can happen is there then can be an instance where organizations tend to have more access to tools than individuals do, right? Because again, if I'm someone who has put in work, for whether my motive was mostly or purely academic, or my motive was just for profit, I often will, once I come up with a tool, technique, a quiz, an instrument, want to be able to find a way to continue financially with my work. And often then people will sell these ideas and tools and techniques to clients, and often the clients are big organizations. So many people, when they look at the idea of this Myers-Briggs, even when they look at the episode title and they say, oh, right, Myers-Briggs, MBTI, people are familiar with it. Because if you look in the show notes, I went to try to find some analysis and assertions about this instrument, because we're trying to figure out, is this a myth? Is it accurate? Is it something I should believe in when it tells me I'm an INTJ, or it tells me I'm anything else? Or is it something that's just absolutely hogwash and I shouldn't listen to it at all? Who knows what it is? So one of the sources that I used and I referenced in the show notes is from a Washington Post article entitled "Does It Pay to Know Your Type?" And I mentioned some of the data from that source. So according to that source, more than 10,000 companies, 2,500 colleges and universities, and 200 government agencies in the United States use this test. It's estimated that 50 million people have taken this Myers-Briggs personality test since 1962, actually. And that's a lot of people, relatively speaking. I mean, it depends on what the question is, right? So currently there's over 7 billion people on the planet. So if we're looking at that and we're saying it's 50 million, I mean, quantifying it as, quote, a lot is, again, relative. But relative to, one person going and researching an idea and coming up with this tool or technique and then sort of giving it to friends and family, I don't know if it would have reached, 50 million people in terms of dissemination and utilization if it hadn't been part of a structured, commerce-driven program where it was marketed to colleges, universities, employers, things of that nature. So if nothing else, we can argue that it's popular. Now, we certainly know from so many of the programs and just so many of our basic critical thinking skills that the popularity doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? In fact, that can be a fallacy, appeal to popularity. But it is out there. And so many people, again, when they see this program, and one of the reasons I'm doing the program is because people ask me about this, right? It's so popular that people in their social lives, or people sometimes even in their dating life, or, refer to this and will say, I am this thing. This is what this test told me I am, this personality type, or this tool or instrument. And so I am this thing, and this information is how I'm going to start making decisions about work, which is one of the things that this instrument and tool is marketed for. That's why 2,500 colleges and universities have used it. It's for often not just their own employees and staff and faculty, but it's for students who are trying to figure out that that issue that some people say that they struggle with. Right? What do I want to do when I grow up? What do I want to do? I'm not sure. So this is one of those tools that someone can take and ideally come up with an answer. And so it may help somebody potentially figure out, that's the type of work that might bring me that positive emotional return on investment, right? What we call in my programs practicing the joyful art of business. It's something that people have taken beyond that. And even in my own research for this show, just looking out on common search engines, I see people literally referring to this again, way beyond their professional life and in their social life. And even having forums where they sit around and share information about other people who say they have the same result of the personality type indicator. And what does that mean for when they want to date or when they want to have friends, or what kind of parties should they throw? I mean, it's really interesting, right? But all of that's predicated on the idea that this has some validity. There's a lot of different things out there that people make decisions on. Many people believe in the idea that the day you were born tells you things about your personality. Some people believe that based on the idea of the horoscope, right? And they'll ask you, what's your astrological sign? That's been around for a very long time in people's social life. And many people believe absolutely that has credible, powerful information for them to dictate all types of things. I'm not addressing that in this show because that certainly would be a different show. But my point is that the idea of us searching, or not even searching, let's say that we feel pretty confident that we've located who we are, but continuing to think about how we process information and how we make decisions is something we all think about. So some people, ascribe a lot of information and power in terms of who they are and how they think and how they live their lives to, what day they were born or what month, or some sort of birth order is something that people spend a lot of time. I'm maybe someone says I'm the third child in my family or the ninth child, or what does that mean? And there's so many different things that we spend time on, right? So this is just one of them. The interesting thing about this is it's sort of an intersection of so many areas of things that are interesting for me. So, of course, I study and have a graduate study in psychology because I'm fascinated by that entire area, and I'm fascinated by people and why they do what they do. Of course, business is one of my other areas of study and academic credentialing and degrees and what I teach and what I live. I love it, right? And these things impact our behavior, which also impact how we operate within legal frameworks, which is another one of my areas. So I'm super. I'm someone primed to love stuff like this. And by stuff like this, I mean something that is allegedly scientifically based, right? Because I like data, and so much of what we do in all these programs is trying to determine, is this something that's credible, even potentially credible, or is it something that absolutely no at all? It's just something that is an old wives' tale, or it's something that people just tell themselves, or it's a myth, it's a fable. So it's really important, because if we can't figure out what's a credible, actionable, potential piece of data from something that's just a pretend falsehood, it's really difficult for us to make healthy choices and choices that are going to give us the best possible outcome. So this is just the core of, critical thinking and so much of what we need to do to have some sense of momentum in our lives. Some would argue potentially maybe even control. And my argument is to make good decisions for ourselves, our organizations, our families. So it's helpful to work through this process. All right, so the Myers-Briggs is out there. I think that's a relatively credible fact. It's somewhat popular. I think that's a rather credible fact. Many people that are part of this program right now have taken it through their employer, through being in the military, through their university. So again, it exists. It's not something that two people have taken. The idea is that you have these different distinct axes, and the idea is, are you introverted, are you extroverted, are you sensing, are you intuition, are you thinking versus feeling, are you judging versus perceiving? And then you take the tool, and then at the end of it, you look at your results, and it's supposed to indicate to you which of these you're stronger, which area you're stronger in. And so I've taken numerous examples of the Myers-Briggs and other instruments that are purportedly and allegedly similar to Myers-Briggs, but are not actually Myers-Briggs. And of course, part of that is, if you go and you read the Washington Post source article that I quoted in the show notes, you'll see that, of course, it's incredibly financially successful. That somebody, it's like anything else, intellectual property. So somebody created this tool or technique, and then they own it, and then they have the ability to control who is eligible for their official training programs, who is able to use and deploy the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and so that's their business. And of course that limits access to it, because since that's their business, then ideally it makes obvious logical conclusion that you're not going to go out there and then put that everywhere for free, because then why would you charge for it? So what's happened, and if you look in the show notes, I've just given you one link to just one example of a tool that is allegedly somewhat similar to Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, because if you've never taken it, Myers-Briggs, and you don't have an opportunity at your school or your employment, and you're just curious what we're sharing, then I suggest, why not? Go out there. Now, how valid are these purported free website tools in relationship to with the actual Myers-Briggs? I don't know, and I can't certainly speak to without doing the research. But it will give you a rough idea, I would argue, of at least big picture what this whole thing is about. And so the research, well, yeah, it is. We'll call it research. The link that I provide in the show notes, I actually went and I took that free online tool technique, and it gave me the exact same results I get every other time I've taken the actual Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, that I am allegedly this INTJ. So assuming that that's anecdotally something of a potential argument for some sort of utility in terms of just sort of big picture, then that's why I included it in the show notes. And one of the things I struggle with is that, like we've been discussing, we humans, we want the answer. We'd love to know more about ourselves. One, because it's just interesting. Even though we are ourselves, at some level there's still that distance sometimes where we do wonder, why did I do that? Why do I think that way? Why do I react that way in those types of settings? And so it doesn't hurt for us to I always in all the programs strongly recommend that we spend time individually with ourselves in silence, listening to what? To our thoughts. And it may be part of a formal meditation program or not. It may be part of a spiritual program or not. It may be related to some religion or not. That to me is not the point. But just to spend time with your own thoughts and ideas is a fertile way to open up your own creativity and also put you in touch with yourself, right? So I think and I am a huge advocate of this, right? To thine own self. Be true, but that requires me knowing who I am and spending time with myself, which sounds weird, but if somebody's very, very busy and their entire schedule from their moment that they are awake to the moment they go back to sleep is just full of other people and stimuli and distractions, many people have very little, if any, time at all with themselves, which does inhibit their ability then to get in touch with how they're feeling, what their needs are, what their ideas are, their own creativity and interests and dreams. So that's why I always encourage that as much as possible. Our question here is trying to determine, of course, big picture, is this Myers-Briggs Type Indicator potentially credible? The challenge is, as I noted in the show notes, that we don't really know. Of course, the standard and much of scholarship is the idea that people go out and conduct rigorous research, and then other peers who are trained subject matter experts with similar levels of expertise will then evaluate and review the research that this individual researcher or scholar or academic is putting forward to try to determine what was their process, was it statistically valid, things of this nature. And those are typically called peer-reviewed, and like it sounds like, right? Peer-reviewed makes total sense. I'm going to go out and tell you that this is what I've come up with in my brilliant research. And then other people who are, again, similarly experienced and educated in my field of expertise are going to look at it and review and look and see what I was really doing. Because if I go and tell you that this is some brilliant research in the area of chemical engineering and you're not a chemical engineer, then it's more difficult for you to be able to figure out if what I'm telling you is true because you don't know. So the idea of having a peer, another chemical engineer expert, similarly experienced, will be able then to really understand what I'm claiming and look through my work and try to figure out is it potentially credible, something that might actually be really insightful and valid research, or is this just stuff I'm lying and making up? Now, there's a whole fascinating area in this of intrigue and power struggles within this idea of this peer review. And ideally, historically, what happened is people had these little peer reviews, and then because there's so many different types of research, right? So if I'm in chemical engineering, or if I'm someone who's studying criminal law, or I'm someone who is looking at pancreatic cancer. I mean, there's so many specific things that we are interested and curious and study that then what tended to happen is that people created these journals. They would have, and they would literally be a written journal where people in that area of expertise would come together and submit their research, and then other peers in that same area. So you don't have the chemical engineer looking at the oncology cancer research because they don't know what they're talking about. But they come together in these groups, often in academies. They'll literally be like a group, a professional group that you're the professional chemical engineer, you're the professional economist, you're the person who's a business law. You will join with other people who are in your area, and then historically they create these journals where they go out and people share their research, and then other people who are equal experts in that same area then peer review it to try to check and see, does this make sense? Is it logical? Is it just a whole bunch of lies? What's going on? So these peer review journals are sort of the gold standard, the most rigorous way that we know to try to check and see is something true or is it just a lie, right? Because people have been, selling snake oil salesmen, right? The whole idea that somebody's just lying. They're up there saying, oh, this is the cure for all these things. And historically, right, we've got movies and art and narratives all about this because this is something throughout human nature, right? People go around and they spout all this information and they're like, look, this is what I know, I've discovered, this is it. And the reality is it's a total lie, it's a falsehood. But because the average person doesn't know detailed analysis and substance about everything, I mean, nobody could know everything. So somebody who's, an expert on, nuclear science is not going to be an expert on business law. It's just, there's no way. There's not enough time, because just to be an expert in one broad area, and to earn a doctorate, which is historically the group I'm talking about, these are people who love this so much that they went to formal education, or in the past they taught themselves and then qualified for the designation or acknowledgement that they were an expert. But however they went through the process, at the end of it, typically they had some sort of heightened level of credential or degree, and then they would meet with other like-minded people who actually their job is to go around thinking. That's what researchers do, is they go think about things. And then they think about it and they come up with a way to test their ideas, and then they share that information with other people who study the same thing to try to stop people from just making up lies. And then going to the public and being like, oh, this will cure arthritis, and oh, this will make you grow 2 feet taller, or this will make sure that you never get shingles or whatever. So the whole idea is to try to have some check and balance in the system to sort of stop fraud and myths and lies from getting out there and people being hurt and killed by this type of fraud. So when you look at the show notes, you'll see with our MBTI, we run up against a little bit of a challenge. There has never been, it says no major journal has published research on the MBTI, which academics consider a strong repudiation of the test authority. And it's a classic chicken and egg problem. No major journal has published on it. Therefore, no elite academic will support it. Therefore, no major journal will publish it. Okay. So if you're somewhat just hearing about this and new to this area and thinking, well, who really cares? I try to include that in the show notes why you might care. Because this is such a somewhat popular, or rather ubiquitous, depending on what field you're in, a tool, and you've either taken it or you might probably have to take it, not have to, but be strongly encouraged to, then you need to understand what it means. And on one hand, it might be that it absolutely positively is the most accurate and powerful truth-telling thing that ever has existed. On the other hand, it might not at all. The absence of having these peer-reviewed journals publish research on it may be incredibly indicative of whether or not it's credible, and it may not be related at all, right? That's the chicken and egg problem. We don't know. But all of this information, these are all things you need to think about. So what I argue at this moment in time that I've taken, and like I said, I've taken the actual Myers-Briggs, and then I've taken these, sort of free website alleged somewhat similar tools, and they've all told me, all of them actually have told me that I am this INTJ, introvert, intuitive, thinking, judging. When I go to the Myers-Briggs official website, which I've included the link in the show notes for you to go there to go look and see, when I read what it says about INTJ, well, it kind of sounds awesome. It says INTJ have original minds and great drive for implementing their ideas and achieving their goals. Quickly see patterns in external events and develop long-range explanatory perspectives. When committed, organize a job and carry it through. Skeptical and independent. Have high standards of competence and performance for themselves and others. So, of course, I take these tests, I look at those results, and I think, well, oh, that sounds really awesome. It all reflects back to me some of the positive things I think about myself. Independent and original, and ooh, I love all of that, right? Driven. Yet I must say this. There are 16 different personality types, and they're all on that one link there in the show notes where I was reading from INTJ. But you can go on there and read every other one of them. As I go through and read the other ones, they sound kind of nice too. And one of the things about these types of tools, of course, is there's no right answer, right? It couldn't be. Otherwise, you're not going to have 50 million people take it, because it might create anxiety for people if they feel like they're not getting the right answer. Ideally, this is an example of we all are equal and awesome and just different. But yeah, we're going to learn to work together. I love what the INTJ says, but I also like and love potentially what other things tell me. I'm not really sure if the results told me a different answer that I would disagree. I don't know. They all sound lovely. And the idea, though, is how much is your own personal bias for what you want to believe about yourself influencing your assessment of these types of tools. And again, this is just one example. I picked this obviously because it's very popular and it's widely utilized. Whether or not in your own life you should take this tool and get your personality type according to the results and then base your entire life around that, I actually don't advise that for really anything. When I go out into the wide web, I read all kind of beautiful things, I would argue, in my mind, about INTJ. Supposedly it's one of the rarest of the personality types. Some sources claim that it may only be 1 or 2% of people who are in this group. Some sources claim that people who are very intellectually gifted are in this group. All of that, of course, would stroke my ego. Although, at this point, we don't have enough data to know and to be able to make a decision, a credible decision based on research, whether or not it's accurate. It may be that all that strokes my ego and it's absolutely just baloney. It may be that all of the information is absolutely accurate and that we will, in the future, have a body of peer-reviewed research that establishes that this is the tool that will make or break so many of us in terms of our success in life. I don't know, and nobody knows right now, partially because of what we referenced in the show notes, the fact that we don't have a lot of data on this from these major journals that are peer-reviewed. And that matters. Certainly, anyone who's selling us something is going to tell us how great it is because that's their job, because they're selling it. And if they can't sell it and show us how great it is, then they're going to go out of business. So that's their job, and we respect that. We respect it immensely, but we always remember if someone's trying to sell me something, they have a very strong motive for whatever assertions they're making. That's just reality of life, and it's a healthy thing. It's our job to use our critical thinking skills to make good decisions. So here we are. Is it a myth? At this point, my argument is that there's no substantial risk of harm in taking actually the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator or another one of these internet-free similar type tools. As long as you understand that we don't have conclusive results to help us understand how credible it may or may not be. So if you put it in there along with everything else that's out in the world, does it hurt you to read your horoscope when you start your day? I would argue probably not. Unless there's something that you read that someone intentionally is trying to, tell you to go out and, rob a bank or something. But I don't usually see that in horoscopes. On the same token, is it anything that's going to potentially harm you if you take this specific Myers-Briggs Type Indicator or some similar alleged tool? I would argue no. Might this be something that's very scientifically valid that may open up for you an introspection where you do begin to think, oh my goodness, that's how I process information. That's how I relate to people. That's how I see the world. It could be. It absolutely could be, and that may be part of the reason why this framework has been so popular. It might be, and it might be that in the coming time period that there is a body of very high level research that does support that. We don't know right now, so I don't have enough information to label this a myth. I also don't have enough information to label it at this point credible. So we're going to leave it in the to be determined category. I strongly encourage you, if you haven't taken this or you took it a long time ago, go out there and look at some of these free tools and sort of read about it. It can't hurt you. I also argue, don't take to heart your and change your entire core belief in who you are and say, I'm not going to socialize or make friends with or date or work or, live near people who don't fit my, MBTI framework information. I find that would be not making good choices because we don't have conclusive data. If you want to go ahead and read it and think about it and see what value you think it might have in your life, do so. Strongly encourage. I love information and strongly encourage us to do so. Is this something at this point that I would say is as powerful or as useful as going to the doctor and getting a medical test? No. So I would, again, encourage you to make your good decisions. I thank you so much for joining me. And as always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information.